the CXO series. Today, I have the honor of introducing our speaker for today, Soumendra Mohanty, who's the Chief Operating Officer and Executive Vice President Analytics at Tredence. Today, he will be talking about the topic, Building an AI-Powered Enterprise, the New Playbook. The session will be moderated by Soumendra DHANRAJANI, the CEO and co-founder of AIQRATE Advisory and Consulting. Before we start, I'd like to just give a few housekeeping rules. I'd like you all to please stay all on mute through the entire session. If you have any questions, and we will be taking questions, could you please put them on the chat or the Q&A panel that you have as a part of the WebEx, and I will relay these to Samir. Any questions that are not answered during the session, we will get back to you after the session. All right. I'd like to introduce our speaker, Soumendra Mohanty. He is the EVP Analytics and COO of Tredence. In a career spanning over 24 years, Soumendra has led key growth portfolios such as IIoT, data, analytics, artificial intelligence, intelligent RPA, digital integration, digital experience, and platforms, bringing in world-class capabilities, innovative solutions, and transformation-led and outcomes-based value propositions to global clients. Prior to joining Tredence, Soumendra was the EVP and CDAO at LTI. He was also the Senior Vice President and Global Head of the Digital Services Business at Mindtree, as well as the Managing Director at Accenture, responsible for global data analytics capabilities. Soumendra holds a master's degree in computers and applications from the College of Engineering and Technology, Bhubaneswar, and an MIT X-Pro data scientist. Thank you, Soumendra, for making time. It's an honor to have you here with us. Samir, I now hand over the dais to you. It's all yours.
Thanks, Rohan, for the introductions, and Shom, welcome to the webinar session. I think one of the things which I would like to begin, and I think it's a privilege to get you over the show. You've been a hidden jewel in the whole analytics AI arena, if I may call it. And you've done two tremendous stints in terms of a great body of work, Accenture and LTI. So I think before we get on to, I would say, the main aspect about building an AI-powered organization, would just be keen, and maybe it's good for the participants to know some of the salient kind of, let's say, body of work which you did at Accenture and LTI in terms of analytics and AI.
Thank you, Samir. And first, I must congratulate you and the team, AIQRATE. During these times, this forum is something I look forward to. I've seen some of the past sessions with some of my esteemed speakers. I know them personally as well. It's a brilliant thing, right? It keeps all of us abreast of what is happening, what are the new trends, and the thinking and the approaches behind it. So congratulations to you and your team. It's a pleasure to be here on this forum this evening. And going back to your question, it's kind of a wide spectrum, if you may. Solving for large enterprise problems is at one end of the spectrum, which has got its own nuances, more from an internal sponsorship, a top-down approach, looking into the business outcomes-oriented aspects of it. It is less probably the technology complexities of how to do these things. To the other end of the spectrum is innovation and incubation, which is more to do with a lot of experimentation capabilities one needs to build. Because most of this AI, and we are kind of putting AI as a very broad term, but most of the things within AI, and as you start the journey, the problem itself takes different shapes and forms and sizes as you go along in that journey. And there are several such examples we will talk about during the course of this conversation. two things I would probably like to pick, which is very close to my heart, is one is for a mechanical and a physical oriented world. This is for one of the large construction giants in this part of the world, where digital means something very different, right? For a construction, for labor intensive materials and machines oriented world, how would you do a digital transformation there? So take that as one kind of example where a lot of experimentations, a lot of proofing, things that you will discard on the way, even though from a technology perspective, you may feel really great about it, right? But it doesn't probably make a lot of sense from sustainability and business outcome context. To the other spectrum, and the example that I would say, this is for a government initiative around how would you look into a variety and a plethora of information and bring those things together to a platform where you can then start experimenting on what to do, how to deal with these things and derive values from it as you go along. Right? Two different challenges, two different perspectives. But that is how the world is, and that is how AI needs to be perceived and sustained and sponsored.
So you mentioned interestingly, Shom, about two part of the spectrum, and I know what will the participants at this stage will greatly benefit. I know you've done tons of consulting engagements and really shown the kind of impact of AI back to the clients, and we'll discuss that during the session. Coming to one aspect, and I openly challenge this thing over the last 7 webinars while we've got the leaders who's been the people who've done the AI analytics, and with you being over there, one of the thing which is seemingly coming out is digital transformation, which is an often used, abused kind of, let's say, word, cannot be done without AI. I mean, seemingly it's a big kind of, let's say, umbrella digital transformation, but it's being imminently clear now that without the AI foundation being put in place within the enterprise, agnostic of the verticals of the industry segment, it cannot be done. What's your view about that? Are we saying that, okay, while digital transformation is fine, but AI needs to be the more transformative agenda for the enterprises, specifically when they will be coming out of the COVID and moving into the next charter of revival, growth, and further on?
I would agree with you. I think the perspective that digital transformation is a lot about the front end, the interactions, the experience, the channels part of it, right? And that is what it is absolutely a very misplaced way of looking at things from a digital transformation perspective. It cannot be skin deep. When I say skin in this context is the jazzy and glossy interaction channels that we see. Right? It cannot be just skin depth. It needs to go further below. And that requires a lot of data. That requires a lot of integrations across systems. That requires ability to automate. That also requires ability to have a sense and respond mechanism. And sense and respond mechanism, going forward, it is going to also become much more critical as you get into a post-COVID-19 scenario, is where you have to learn, you have to adapt, and that cannot happen without strong AI underpinning. You need to find a way of feedback mechanisms, self-learning concepts within that. You have to validate, and you have to automate a whole lot of things around it. Waiting for a signal to come and then you will make a decision, and that will churn many more other systems and machinery to finally give you the actions that you would like to see. That time lag is no longer acceptable. So the more closer you have to get to the edge points where decision making is extremely important. And I'm talking about retail stores where on-shelf availability is going to become very, very critical. I'm talking about the field sales guys who are going to make the routes. A recommendation to them with what kind of inventory to stock and carry is going to become extremely important. When you are dealing with a smaller set of suppliers for the necessary goods, etc., needs to be stocked at different places or even from warehouse on a distribution channel, you have to understand that how do I look into who is the best supplier to that particular warehouse location, and how quickly I can get with the quality, and I have to be also cognizant about the cost implications. Because post-COVID, it is very, very dramatic. It is going to be cost conscious and timely, and it needs to be much more actionable than what we see today. All these things cannot happen if you don't stay focused on AI. You can't just put a skin on top of everything and make it jazzy and interactive and responsive and say we are done with digital transformation. That is not what it is. And mind you, things like cloud, which were on many companies took the plans, many were on the fence, but now they don't have a choice with remote working on everything. You have to find a way so that you can access systems and everything much more secure and scalable way. And cloud is the only option to go for that. Things like IoT has to be embedded now into everything that you do, because that's where the signals as the front you are capturing. And that is how you need to go back and make those actions happening at the point of interaction. So a lot of this needs AI underpinning and strong experimentation capabilities.
Great. So I think this whole aspect about what you said, the underpinning per se in digital transformation is AI. And without that, it will be futile to kind of really look at the whole transformation of the business or the value chain for the organization. Truly said. And I pick up the points what you rightly said, the ability for sense and respond in terms of creating those systems which are more intuitive and immersive, and maybe at some stage start decision making for the organization. One of the things, Shom, continuing the conversation and being part of large organizations, and even currently with Tredence, I'm sure you've seen multitude of these large contracts which are created under the umbrella of digital transformation. Now, of course, there is an AI component over there. There is analytics depending on the maturity where they are. Seemingly, my observation, and I'm just trying to validate that with your views coming in as well, is most of the time, these large deals, large pursuits, and large engagements carry the first kind of a, let's say, what I say, if I take a bracketized approach, our data is not in shape. So, and this has been, I would say, a kind of a holy grail for last almost, I would say, 10 years. And then suddenly you see that within that large deals, the expectation is they want to take decisions using AI. And there is a whole wide gap, as you understand, between data not in shape and ability to take decisions using algorithms. What, in your sense, at some level needs to happen to ensure that on one side there are these Fortune 500,000 companies which can accelerate their AI transformation, and the providers on the AI side, the consulting companies, can also lay out a bit of what I say a sanity check to make it happen. I just want to take your views because you dealt with these kind of situations a lot in your previous and current organization.
Absolutely. I think, and thanks to actually our data is not in shape. I will be very candid with you and with the audience, is that because of that statement, people like us will comfortably retire, right? And continue to make the career progression on that side. But jokes apart,
I'm sorry to chime in, but I'm coming to that holy quintessential question which I've always been asked in these meetings. More than me, it's about the queries. Hey, what's the impact? What's the impact is secondary, but if the ability, why don't you continue? I'm sorry, I'm just taking that particular thing.
no, jokes apart, but it's a serious topic. I have been, advisor to many CDOs and CAOs worldwide. And every time I walk into a conversation, while they have a list of problem statements that they need to deal with and find solutions for that, it ultimately boils down to that, what is our data strategy? We are not so sure about it. The quality of data, we always have a question mark. And the hoarding mentality of data by departments, by functional owners, because for whatever reason it may be, still prevails over there. In fact, with one of the very budding CDO from South Africa, she put it actually very nicely to me that we are still romanticizing about data. So, and it is continuing, right? So going back to your original point, while the AI strategy or the digital transformation as an enterprise strategy, and it is coming from board, the CEO is on board on it, it has got the top-down sponsorship into it. What happens lastly is about understanding what data that is actually you need to do things versus boiling the ocean to look at every possible thing all around you and losing the steam and the path on the way. I think that is number one. Number two, I would say that algorithms making decisions and recommendations, in my view, what I have seen is always welcome. But the algorithm needs to be also explainable that why it did what it did. Yeah? And in many of the situations, and it is because that we don't really go and open it up and talk about it. And it's a lot of internal, I would say, coaching and change management, which is what I see in the entire strategy missing. People who have been doing the kind of work they have been doing and making decisions over the last 10, 15 years, suddenly you bring in this AI angle to them. The way it should happen is AI is there to augment your capabilities. AI is there to assist you to do things better and faster. And AI is here to make certain aspects of your menial and redundant work automated. It is not going to be something that is going to replace you because it cannot become that kind of a super intelligent object or intervention. I think these are the things that needs to play largely in a change management way of doing it. And it needs to be embedded back into the business processes. I'll give you one particular example here. While we were looking into, for this particular client, while we were looking into a lot of purchase orders and invoices, and then, it's a typical financial function, but it is at the core of a lot of cash flow, inflow, and outflow, and which is very, very critical for the company. What was happening is, as you see, and it's a global company, got a lot of suppliers and a lot of different places where things need to go and needs to be procured and approved and all that. The data was all lying around. There are multiple departments dealing with same set of suppliers, same set of raw materials, but they were never connected. The connectedness of data was never, ever done. And hence, across the enterprise, there was no way of knowing that are we really driving a good bargain? Are we really doing a proper cost negotiation? Are we really looking at the supplier performance as it happening? as an enterprise, are we really moving forward, or we are stuck wherever we were 10 years back and we're just continuing in that journey? Now, understand that this is where you get a lot of procurement officers and vendor management officers, and then a lot of these things, which is what they do for a living. And now when you bring in an AI agent, which is looking across everything and then recommending that this is what you should do for this procurement order, right? It is very hard to take that as a human and say, okay, I will go with you, what you're recommending. Yeah? Now, what we did, and this is the problem in every single AI implementations worldwide, right, big or small. What we did there was to turn the game around and say, look, while this is a recommendation, obviously there is a feedback loop and you can override and then you can do modifications and all. So the absolute final decision making is with you. But here is a leaderboard across different departments, procurement offices, and how they're using AI recommendation to do better and where you stand. Immediately that changed around. There is a trust, there is explainability around it, and it becomes okay, I need to also be a part of this journey. So you can see this entire thing, there is a data issue because that data strategy was never there in the first instance. It was always looked upon as a digital transformation. So let's bring some mobile apps and let's do some good, nice web designs and this and that and all that. No, it went further down. What's the data strategy? How do we look into all of this data? How do we clean it up? How do we make it a centralized view for the entire enterprise to see and understand what is going on? The second was the AI agents and the algorithms, while they were doing their job brilliantly. How would you accept what they are saying and then put it into your actionable for your day in life? That's where you have to bring in change management as well. And combination of these things works wonders.
So Sean, we are getting into a very interesting flow, what you said, and I take some of the nuggets from your narrative. One is this thing around explainable algorithm, because it has to get into that phase where it's not a causal impact, it's more about preempting the situations. And of course, what will resonate in my mind will be, of course, this romanticizing the data. While that's a different thing, whether it's a surrogate romance or a real one. But the aspect, what you rightly said, that this whole cycle back in terms of linking the data strategy to the insights and recommendation is interesting. And that's something which is the essence of our theme. And I want to straight away jump into that and take your words of wisdom. AI-powered organization, subtly, and you rightly said that there is something about AI which makes clients go about this thing. And certainly we see all across organizations, irrespective of their maturity of analytics to AI, there seems to be a very kind of a visible buoyancy about let's do something which makes our decision making, insights, recommendation much more supple, agile, and it could be to thwart competition, stay relevant, and maybe kind of become more agile within the organization. But at the end of the day, there is a playbook over there. It's not something, what you rightly said, you just pick up few ad hoc, piecemeal, POC kind of, let's say, engagements, and there you go, you'll have a kind of a Eureka moment. Doesn't happen. Now, linking back to the experience, what you carry over the years in terms of these implementations. And I want to start bit by bit in terms of saying, you want to build one, okay, let's take two aspects. One, there is an organization, let's say a conglomerate, kind of a thing, been into existence for quite, I would say, long in terms of relevance. They've been kind of there as part of different business subsidiaries, and they haven't been into a digital transformation stroke AI transformation phase. But they are keen to kind of implement AI within their organization. What's the kind of a journey or rather a playbook you will kind of, let's say, suggest to them? And I'll come to the second, let's say, facet later, please.
In my view, there are 5 things that need to be there.
Okay.
The first one is the consumer experience. And when I say consumer experience, it is slightly broadened. It could be the internal consumption for insights and information and to do things better, faster, turn around things in a better way and all. So there is I will say there is a consumer experience part of it, right? The second part of it is, and this is where the strategy question comes in always, is how would you look into your core systems on which the company runs today? There is a run the business kind of an aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
These are very hardened systems with rules. With it has seen many years of downturns and upswings and all, and it has survived. And there is a reason why it is like that, right? So that's the core systems. How would you digitize them? And when I'm saying digitization, it requires to be looked into that you have to make the systems much more approachable, much more interconnectedness from there. It cannot be islands existing and you do point to point integrations and you'll break it apart. No, you have to find a way. How do I digitize these core systems out there? That's the second part. The third part, which I talked upon a few minutes back, is data and data and data. Right? From all of these things, you have to find a way to extract data. And data is a broader term I'm kind of putting in as largely about your sense and response systems around it, because without data, you can't do that. And hence, that's the third, I would say, critical component in the playbook. The fourth one is about how would you put in a change management. And in many strategies, you will find there is technology and there is data, and you have done all the consumer experience part of it. And then you realize that adoption is not happening because that is always as the afterthought. Change management and how do you rally around, how do you take the entire enterprise along with you, that adoption problem you need to solve with a very solid intervention of change management. Finally, in the AI world, in the data world, and this digital transformation / AI transformation, it is very hard to fathom that you know everything. And you have got all possible problem statements, you have got all possible solution ideas, and you have hired a lot of data scientists and data engineers, you have set up a team, you have got some platforms, powerful platforms from vendors, you put together everything and the magic should happen. Seldom it works that way. So you have to find a way to engage the enterprise through 4 different phases of how do we innovate, how do we incubate, how do I implement, and how do I industrialize. I think these 4 underpinning needs to be there across the board. That's the only way the enterprise will be ready, enterprise will be actually running on the ground doing things. The costal side of it is, and I very recently posted a small blog about it, is you will find many enterprises, and you yourself said, Samir, that there is a buoyancy around AI. Everybody wants to do AI. But a lot more AI in the labs and in the dev environments and in the incubation units. Very little AI living or seeing the production scenarios, because there is a chasm there, right? And that is because the operationalization of AI is not what people have thought through. What you developed, what you experimented on, and the outcome, which is the business ROI, these are 2 different worlds. You can actually present a POC or a pilot to the business owners, and you can take the kudos from there. Yeah, this makes sense. Is it ready for scale? Is it ready for responsiveness? Is it explainable? Because nowadays you find a lot of GDPR and CCA and a whole bunch of privacy and then other things coming in as well. Is it reproducible? Can you at any point in time pick up any algorithm in production and then see, is it doing the thing what it was designed for?
So, Shom, if I may take, and I'm sorry to chime in, you provided a very fantastic rendition of the organizations that have been there for quite some time and how they should go about this looking at AI powered journey, these 5 steps and 4 underpinnings. Question over there, and this is you and your observation. Shouldn't they be kind of getting to a stage when they are crafting their business strategy and then saying how do they should embed AI within their businesses, process and functions? Or you see that it's happening or it's just a standalone thing? Okay, now we should be doing AI because the competition is doing. What's the stage you see organizations doing that?
I'll probably give you 3 different answers to that, and please bear with me because um, from outright serious conversations in boardrooms, which I'm privy to downright hilarious. There is a pattern in there, or I would say different anecdotes there. In many of the boardroom conversations I've been a part of, um, it's a very serious topic that we are launching this new product, or we want to go to market to go to a new market, or we are going to look into a very, very distinct competitive advantage. Um, and the conversation starts with a lot of business planning, business scenarios, market scenarios, and typical management 101. And, this is where the board actually, was surprising to me, asked some very pertinent question that is it sustainable? And where is the intelligent and self-intelligence, external outside-in view into this? Where is that impetus coming in? I don't see that in the business plan, business strategy. And but I'm saying this because obviously there is a, pointed to that where is AI in the strategy, right?
So the question over there to what you say, how often have you seen a chief analytics officer or an AI head or an AI expert or an AI advisor or consultant sitting in that boardroom and taking those decisions with the board or the senior heads? Is it happening or it's just that, oh, there is a strategy and then loop in the AI person? What's your take on that?
I think, like I said, right, there are 2, 3 anecdotes around it. I think the immediate reaction within the room, except, and I was a consultant there, so obviously my view is at the end. But the immediate reaction from the CXOs in the room is that, well, we have not thought about our data. Our data is still problematic. This will require quite a lot of platform and technologies and skills base which we don't have. And finally comes down to that what are these outcomes that we need to define along with the AI strategy which helps us get there. Different nods, different disagreements, but in general, what I find is, there is a view into, yes, AI should be and must be at the front and center of these business strategies. The approaches people have taken is, one is a very top-down way of elaborate laying out how AI is going to change, their entire business model or business impact, versus sometimes I've seen a bottom up as well, that we must do these 20 things and that will eventually take up in that journey and it will define AI strategy, if not now, maybe a year from now, as we see these things getting adopted within the enterprise. So there is a bit of a test and learn approach to versus there is a directive futuristic impact way of looking at approach. I see both the patterns out there.
So if we take another facet, Shom, you gave a very good aspect about an organization which is almost like a conglomerate, multiple business, been there for some time. On the other side of the spectrum, now we have something what we call new age companies, asset light companies, the platform based. Surprisingly, the conversation which is coming out while I talk to many of them, and I want your views, please. While they are super high on the technology, when you look under the hood, the prowess in terms of algorithms, the maturity, what they should be having in terms of taking those decisions out of a very super efficient AI kind of a strategy seems to be missing. What's your take in terms of what they should be doing to make it much more faster, much more kind of, let's say, integral to part of their organization? And is my observation true, or you have some other views as well, please?
Samir, my friend, I would give a mixed reaction to that, right? Although I would have loved to wholeheartedly agree with you, but I'm seeing slightly different aspects of it as well, right? You are right that these technology-driven companies are much more, I would say, responsive, much more agile, nimble, much more experimentation oriented as opposed to the other larger enterprises where to move an elephant even for an inch this way, that way, it takes a humongous effort. So these guys are not kind of carrying that kind of a baggage in terms of systems or processes or departmental interferences and all that. So which is good. But what they have done is because they have adopted technology first kind of a approach, many of these things they have packaged it in a way that it does things for them. Right? So, and whatever, whether it's a product or a very differentiated service offering, whichever way their business is set up, it does things for them. Now, the interesting part is, like you said, if you click it and then you go under the hood, you will not find a holistic data strategy around it, a holistic AI or algorithms driven strategy around it, change management in terms of, if we change these four things, what will happen? How it is going to impact my consumers or my products or my services. These are the strategies I find missing there. While they have chosen platforms and chosen their solutionings and systems in a way, it does things because it is very narrow in a sense. It does the best of what it is supposed to do. It is not interconnected. It doesn't take a whole outside-in perspective of systems talking to each other. Doesn't have a systems of intelligence kind of a framework all around it. And most importantly, how does the company move along with the changing demographics of data? Because that is changing. That you can't put it on a lock. Consumers changing, behaviors changing, markets changing, and the data is changing itself. So how do you make your entire framework of systems and algorithms and everything to adopt and to accept this changing data demographics? That's the important thing in my mind as the strategy.
Great. So you mentioned about the system of intelligence kicking in for these new age organizations to become more like a force to reckon with. That's a great point. So while I'm also cognizant in terms of the steady flow of questions coming in, and seemingly I was expecting because of the great succinct viewpoints what you have, and I want to take one of them because we've talked a lot about these global, a lot of these organizations. In your view, and you've been kind of instrumental in some of the organizations you've been working in terms of the acquisitions. What's the kind of, let's say, startup ecosystem you see today in India specifically, because we haven't talked in India parlance per se, in terms of AI analytics? How's it in terms of maturity in your view? And what are the kind of, let's say, things they should be doing to make them more, to make their, I would say, startups more visible?
I think a couple of things, and I'm also learning because I have this thing that every weekend I go and meet few startups and spend time with them and all that. So I'm also learning every week what people are doing, what they're thinking, how differently they're approaching the problem statements. As a point in time snapshot from my perspective and what I have seen is a couple of things. One, most of these problem solving the startups are completely focused on is actually looking at a very narrow offering way of going to the market. That here is what my product or my service or my offering is going to solve, and it is going to do this way, right? Now, from a consumer perspective, it is not always that way of doing a very narrowed interaction with your product or service or offering. And hence it requires a bit of a broadening. And this is why I said in my earlier example is that these companies need to also look into systems of intelligence around their offerings and services and products, because you need to listen more, you need to have ability to take more kinds of data inside and then figure out that how do I keep improving on my offering. It is not always the older traditional way of I will run some surveys and talk to a few consumers and market feedbacks, go and tweak around my product. I mean, the world is moving much faster than that cycle. Right? That is number one advice that I have. The second one you said is how would they make themselves more visible in this sense?
Right. Right.
I think going back to the point about how unique and differentiated is your AI strategy, that is going to be extremely important for you to stand, above a whole many number of startups. And mind you, right, each one of the startup that I meet with is doing phenomenal job, whether it is in the IoT space or blockchain, smart cities, on the, in fact, on the COVID aspects of it, supply chain optimizations, distribution efficiencies, and you look at all of the spectrum of things. They're all doing fantastic and very unique value propositions they're bringing. But the AI strategy is what I see missing because it is based on a few algorithms and a few data sets and, how do I do these things in a better way? I think it needs to be broadened. You need to understand what are the adjacency, what are the white spaces, and if I have a really solid AI backbone, I can really look into all of those aspects, seamlessly and much more easy way.
Great, great. So I've also got a question which is linked to your earlier narrative about this building an AI-powered organization. Now, you mentioned about the boardroom conversations and CXOs. Now, seemingly, which is one of the things which is coming in the question is, it requires a cultural change to make an AI, what I say, kind of focus or centric organization. Cultural change is a big thing. So what interventions do the CXOs and boards have when it comes to strategizing an AI thing? Are there those cookie cutter AI strategies available? Do they need to build in terms of customize, or it's something which is still kind of, let's say, coming up? What's your view over there?
Unfortunately, I don't believe in a templatized way of AI strategy for any industry, any company. Yes, you can always find, and we have done it, in Tredence, in LTI, in Mindtree, and even in Accenture, right? In that 50 AI interventions for a retail company, or 50 AI interventions for a pharma company, or a or a high tech company. I think this is what you can probably templatize to that extent. But these are probably concepts and thoughts and maybe some POCs and some lightweight modules up in the air. These things will not change the way organizations will work. These things will not change the way how you go to market and how you start looking at outcome-oriented business impacts, right? So hence this templatization is something that will probably give you a little bit of a running the ground and making everybody understand and maybe evangelize within departments and companies. Oh, this is what you mean by AI intervention. I think that is okay. That is needed. But how do you, like I said before, how do you look at consumers? How do you look at your sense and respond kind of mechanisms? How would you look at digitization of your core systems, right? How would you put a enterprise-wide perspective on, innovate, incubate, implement, and industrialize? If you don't do these things, what will happen is, yes, a high possibility that maybe one or two initiatives will see the daylight and it will do some wonders, but that won't be sustainable. You must find a way to make it repeatable. You must find it a way to be adaptable across the board. And people should start thinking that they are making changes. They are making impacts in whatever they do. That requires a top-down AI strategy, and that needs to be thought through.
So one of the things, Soman, you rightly said about this top-down strategy. But one of the question also is that, and you've done several of these successful engagements. You talked about system of intelligence. So the question is more about, can you narrate an example where this has been successfully adopted by an organization in terms of AI being used as a decision-making tool?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think there are many. But I will try to weave a story around different things coming together to deliver that. Right. This is for a large healthcare / pharma company, and I'm choosing this example particularly because of what we are going through in the current scenario. Yeah. Now, when you look at it, there is a R&D division of it, which is spending a lot of money on, finding and experimenting and all that aspect, and that is pure generation of insights and correlations and finding meaning of things which can bubble up to become decision points. But then that alone cannot just be an algorithmic play. Obviously, given it's a healthcare pharma, you have to also look into NLP and NLG kind of implications into that, building into your solution stack, which is okay, even if you solve that problem. Now you have to look into the entire data strategy behind it, that how do I disseminate this information? There's a lot of sensitivity around the data that you're dealing with. There is also about cross geography, cross market kind of a perspective, because these things, it's a global company. It has got worldwide presence, and then different aspects of the same information need to be distributed and consumed. So you need a heavy underpinning of data strategy, managing data, security of the data, and dissemination of information that you are gleaning out of these algorithms, right? The third aspect of it was largely about people, even though they look at dashboards and charts and the recommendations, they still go back and then try to analyze it. They need to understand, and then they will say yes or no. So how do we bring in a virtual analyst to support them? Here is your own virtual data scientist or analyst, which takes your queries and then churns out very interesting dialogues and commentaries around what does this data point mean and why this is something important for you to look at. Yeah, that intervention you need to do. And finally, going down to the point about that all of these things needs a very, very big change management approach. And because you're rolling it out across the board, across geographies, across departments. And this is where a lot of, I would say, evangelization, a lot of strategy retweaking, because gone are the days when you define an annual strategy and you stick to that, right?
Right.
Things change, it has to be every quarter. There is technology is changing. And for this particular client I'm talking about, we had to go through a technology roadmap assessment, validation, and tweak it every 6 months.
Every 6 months. Okay.
Because there are newer things coming in. There are very interesting value propositions coming in, which is extremely important for the outcome that you are after. But it was not possible 6 months back because it was not there. So that technology architecture strategy also need to be highly flexible, and it needs to go along with the data changing, algorithm shifting, consumers shifting, and the research and the global impacts coming in. So in summary, it is not about that I will develop a POC and I will put it in production, and then R&D department and sales department, distribution department, you nominate your 3-4 guys, they will look into it, and then we'll claim victory. It is not that. Because once you look at the outcome and the impacts you're going to make, both internally and externally, you need to go back, and I will again say, you need to go back to what is your all-encompassing AI strategy behind this?
Great. So I think if I really kind of talk about what you said, Showman, you've been, looks like, a big proponent about AI strategy, and that seemingly, to me, is coming out to be as a big pivot of the conversation. But if organization needs to craft, design, curate an AI strategy, how often, and this is a question from my side, how often do you think it needs to be revised? Is it a monthly kind of a cadence? It's a 3 months, 6 months, or what's your take on that?
Well, I will put it this way, right? Your AI strategy needs to be really thought through. You need to spend some good time to look into what it is, and it has to also be relevant for your business and where you want to take your business to in the coming months or years, right? But within that AI strategy, which could be a kind of a North Star pointing directional perspective, right? Which you can review with the board in your quarterly discussions, right? And you can keep on validating, or you can keep tweaking around it. But in a sense, it's a North Star directional approach that you are taking this company from X to Y in a maturity and all that. And here is my directional AI strategy to take it there. Underpinning that would be a lot of these, I would say, foundational strategies, data strategy, your technology strategy, your team and skills, because competency is extremely important to do these things, right? And your, test and learn and experiment kind of a approach that you put in. These things cannot be yearly strategies. These has to be looked upon, revised, probably every month or every quarter as well. And most importantly, I would say these aspects will be driven by what kind of problems you're trying to solve as you start solving one after the other, after the other, and after the other. And as you keep solving problems, as you keep getting better at your data management, data strategy, you keep getting better about your algorithms and strategy around it, and the skills and competency change management. As you move in the maturity journey, you will find your AI strategy also taking that shape going forward.
Correct.
So it's not taking a month off and then putting 20 people in a room and coming out with AI strategy and saying this is going to be my calendar year 2020 strategy. Right? It is not going to be that way.
So if we look at this, Showman, I've realized in every session what we are talking about, and that's what we've got a couple of questions on this. It's good to have an AI strategy. It's good to have build up in terms of the foundational aspects of building an AI powered organization. But the question remains the ROI. How do we avoid AI being under delivered? What's your take on that? Because the same question, in fact, has come in about these investments which is going into AI, transformation, innovation, disruption. Everything is being talked about, and AI seems to be the silver bullet for all these things. But the question still remains, are we getting the ROI and a bang for the buck where AI is concerned? What's your take on that?
Look, I will take a probably humorous stab at it to start with, but then I know this is very serious. The way we define ROI today is return on investment. And I don't agree with that, right? How about you start thinking this is a return on every single insight that I'm getting?
So ROI is what you're hinting, right?
Yeah. Now,
this is the different eye, right? Great.
Because from a business and priority perspective, it always comes down to show me the money. And right, I'm putting so much money, and which is probably right from a business, prioritization perspective. But I have this counter argument that without the insights, you can continue to prioritize and you can continue to run at a pace X as you're doing now. Everybody else, your competitors, market, and the new disruptions that is coming in, they will run at probably a pace of 10x times than you, because they are based on insights. So that's why I said I will take a humorous stab at it, to begin with. I personally believe, and many of these opportunities and projects that I have worked on, the best way to understand this and best way to tackle this kind of things is to start with what's the outcome. I think we often jump into a perspective that, oh, you want to do a churn modeling and a churn impact because there's a lot of your customers moving away, and let's do a quick modeling and let's deploy. Right? That is one way of doing it. So you're getting into a let me solve the problem.
Right.
And then later on, I will find it, oh, I now have to defend, and hence I have to start thinking about metrics and return on investments and what is the business impact this is making, and I will have to do a storytelling. You start actually cooking a different kind set of dishes around it. Yeah. Instead, your customers are living. So what's the outcome you are looking for? Let me start with the outcome. That outcome has got a business angle to that, which is the goals and money and then all that aspect. Either it's a top line or a bottom line impact. The second part of it is how I'm going to make it sustainable, innovative, self-learning, so that you don't have to do this every time, all the time. And I think this outcome-oriented view into ROI, and that's why I call it return on insights, that every insight I'm going to generate, how does it tilt the business needles? That's what is what I will go for.
Great. So I think this return on insights and an outcome-based approach is what you're recommending. One question, Shom, out here, and this is interestingly, projects in AI fail sometimes, gets aborted, and sometimes fail to kick off. What, in your view, or rather in your experience, have been the stages where clients have felt, oh, it's not taking off, or it should be aborted, or they're not getting the desired return on insights? Have you tackled these kind of situations? And if you have done, which I'm sure you would have done, what's been your response on that side, on that front?
Samir, thanks for that question, because I continue to experience that. It is not that the problem is solved for once and all. And my analysis and my experience, I always go back to who is driving these AI initiatives. Who is the owner of these things? And invariably, I have found where these things failed to take off or aborted midway or the desired outcome never happened and all, when you make it a IT project. That's the pattern everywhere. The failures, as you pointed out, I see as a very consistent pattern. Places where it has really done wonders, and again, it's not a journey that doesn't have ups and downs, but
Right.
when there is a business ownership around that particular initiative, the outcome is what the business has signed up on. Everything else falls in line. So, for people who have dialed in and trying to look for a cheat sheet around it, this is my advice. This is my recommendation, that you have to have a business sponsor, business owner deeply involved in your AI initiative.
And you say that, Shom, it has to be driven from the top. I mean, something you said in your earlier part of the narrative, that it has to be a top-driven and a CXO kind of aligned approach, right?
I think, and I'll share an example for this, gaming company where earlier they used to ship everything as a CD. You cut the games and CD that keeps on coming. You install and you start doing stuff. The only way to understand whether this game is good, bad, ugly, people are hooked into it, and then I can see a market for this, and then do wonders, is the feedbacks that you get or the complaints that you get, right? The lesser number of complaints and the feedbacks, good, positive, will give you a perspective that this is the right thing we need to do or we need to improve in these areas. When digital came, it was not about a CD. Right? And digital was about interactions. Digital was about in-gaming experience. Digital was about how do you keep people engaged and hooked into play more and more episodes or whatever those levels and all that. For that, you need to really get into understanding at a streaming, real-time way of who is the player, what they're doing, why they are not doing well, where they're stuck, how do I give some intervention so that they move on. Plethora of algorithmic interventions you need to do, right? And the business owners signed up on this, right? And it was not and traditionally in many of these very high profile, and this is an electronic gaming company, so this is their business. There's no other business. Hence it is high profile. It's a top line impacting thing. So what they also did, that there is no QBR, which is quarterly business reviews on how we are doing. They changed it to a monthly business review. This is where a top-down sponsorship, this is governance, this is looking into business owners' involvement, and everybody falling in line. When you change this into a monthly business review, you become much more agile.
Apologize, just stepping in. If you're good to continue, we can.
Sure. No, thanks, Rohan. And Shom, we would have loved to continue, but we are hitting the time. And must say, it's been a very engrossing and very engaging conversation. And I've picked up a lot of nuggets. In fact, your entire aspect about system of intelligence and picking up problem statements, which eventually become AI strategy, has been revealing. And I'm sure the participants, because I was getting a steady set of questions right from the beginning, and the participants, I'm sure, have carried literally a playbook in terms of how, irrespective where they are, whether they are a part of a kind of a, let's say, conglomerate or a kind of a setup organization, or they're a startup or a new age company, they've been able to carry, and I'm still getting a lot of those rave reviews right at the time I'm saying, they've been able to carry almost a playbook in terms of where they should start, how they should move, and how they should derive what truthfully you said, return on insights. And eventually, I think that's something which I think it's for everyone to take. I think investment is fine, but the insights aggregated, put together, as long as they change the decision making within your organization, you've got the bang for the buck. Thank you so much, Tom. It's been absolutely a very revealing, very thought-provoking session, and really appreciate your time being there. And thank you so much, all the participants. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks, Samir, for inviting me. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.